For the first time, a healthy baby has been born using the DNA of 3 people. It's a major scientific breakthrough, but what are the ethical implications? Also on today's program, 600,000 flood victims in North Korea are at risk of hunger and disease, according to the Red Cross. Should the world be doing more to help them? And in Picture This, the battle over student tuition fees in South Africa. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Decades ago, when scientists first developed in vitro fertilization, critics attacked not just the morality of IVF, but also claimed it was a slippery slope that would lead to the creation of potentially defective laboratory-made human beings and even the degradation of parenthood itself. But in the last 30 years, IVF has helped millions of parents conceive healthy children. Today, it seems the same debate is raising its head again with the latest medical breakthrough, the birth of a so-called 3-parent baby announced last week, in which scientists introduced the healthy genetic material of a third adult to a 2-parent embryo, eliminating a potentially life-threatening genetic disorder. Our newsmaker today is the world's first 3-parent baby. Does the procedure that led to his birth represent a groundbreaking step in the fight against disease? Or is it a dangerous and immoral development, as its critics have argued?
There's a new way to make a baby, combining DNA from 3 adults. Doctors have taken DNA from the eggs of 2 women to create a hybrid egg that was fertilized with a man's sperm. So why did they do it? The vast majority of genetic information is transferred through the nucleus of the egg cell, but a small amount is also passed on through what's known as mitochondrial DNA, which comes from the mother. In this case, the mother had mutations in her mitochondrial DNA, which meant she could have passed on a fatal genetic disorder to her child. 2 of her children did inherit it and died. The couple, who are from Jordan, wanted to have their own healthy baby, so they turned to doctors in New York for help. Using a technique called spindle nuclear transfer, the doctors took the mother's healthy egg nucleus and combined it with the mitochondrial DNA from a donor egg. They then took the sperm from the father and went ahead with the normal IVF process. And 9 months on, the mother gave birth to a healthy boy. The baby has less than 1% of his mother's gene mutation, which means he hasn't inherited the disorder. The science worked this time, but it's raised questions about conceiving a modern baby. Louise Brown was the first test tube baby in the world, born in 1978 in the UK. Since then, 5 million children have been born through in vitro fertilization techniques. In many countries, it's become a normal way to have a family. Advances in medical science have also meant IVF has been used for genetic screening. Doctors can screen embryos to find out if they carry hereditary illnesses like cystic fibrosis and haemophilia. It's then up to prospective parents to decide if they want to implant those embryos. The 3-parent baby is a major medical breakthrough. But just because gene technology is improving and new methods are possible, is it ethical to alter the genetic makeup of a child? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London is Dr. Duško Ilić. He is a reader in stem cell science at King's College in London. And I'm also joined by Josephine Quintavalle. She is the director of Comment on Reproductive Ethics, or CORE, an organization focusing on ethical dilemmas surrounding human reproduction. Thanks both so much for joining us. Duško, I'd like to start with you. Tell us why you see this as such a positive scientific breakthrough.
I see it as a positive scientific breakthrough because we are able to move forward in curing incurable disease before. And 3-parents baby, this is not first time that this happened. In the 1990s, it was done in the United States, and it was not quite clear how to do. And so their procedure was unsafe, but several people, maybe I think about 20 of them, are still alive, they're healthy teenagers. Now we are able to know how to do technically, and this is proof that we can actually cure incurable disease. So it's big advancement.
Josephine, you and your organization have put forward arguments that this step is actually unethical and it's risky at the same time. Why?
Well, I mean, first of all, we must celebrate the birth of this child who apparently has no mitochondrial disease at the moment. But we've got to unpick what happened. One of the issues that my organisation has campaigned against for a long time is casual approach to egg donation. We don't even like the idea of using the word donation because usually the eggs are sold. But there have been many cases of women who've been involved in giving their eggs up to research purposes, which is what happened here, who've suffered incredibly badly from a syndrome known as hyperstimulation syndrome. So it's not that you can get hold of human eggs as easily as all that. They're not something that you buy in the supermarket. Women have suffered a lot in the process of donating their eggs. But also, I think you have to look at the fact that this is not a cure for mitochondrial disease. It will continue to appear randomly in our society, and we have to find a cure for those babies who will be born in the future and for those who already have the disease itself. We want to cure everybody. I mean, there's a lot more that went on behind the scenes in this case that we don't know too much about. You know, 5 embryos were created.
But
only
Josephine,
one was considered good enough to go ahead. What happened to the other 4? What was wrong with them?
Okay,
what will happen in the future?
But right now, we have a baby whom it looks like will not suffer from a potentially fatal disease because this, you can call it a cure or whatever you'd like, because this development was found. How is that not a fantastic cure for this illness?
Well, I did start off by saying that we celebrate the birth of any child, and it includes this one. But there's been a considerable amount of concern worldwide, not just from people who come, as I do, from a pro-life perspective, but many who've considered that this was taking place in a country where there were no proper controls. And there's a lot more information that has to come to be presented before people can really analyse what did happen. As I say, I hope it is a happily ever after story for this particular baby, but you do have to unpick how this baby was created. And as I say, one of the issues is that eggs from another woman were used in the process.
Okay, Dusko, you seem to at least agree with some aspects of Josephine's case there.
Yeah, I do agree with partly, but I disagree partly. So I agree that this was done in Mexico where there is no regulation, and I'm really unhappy how it was done, because we don't have information whether this particular physician who did the procedure, what was measures of precautions, how much were patients at risk. On the other hand, here in UK, we have a team from Newcastle who is working on this type of the so-called 3-parent baby, which expression that I don't like much, for years, and they really know what they're doing, so patients are not as much at risk. What I disagree, it is great moving forward. You have to use human eggs to practice and to move forward field. It will probably, it's happened in Mexico, but this would push forward legislation in UK and in other countries, and in the future we'll get rid of this.
And Dusko, the first 3-parent baby is expected to be born in the UK next year. Is that's something you do look forward to as a doctor here?
Of course that I'm looking forward. I mean, to be honest, I was expecting that first 3-parent baby, that first baby that was cured of mitochondrial disease, free of mitochondrial disease, would be born in UK. But this was, how was done this in Mexico, it was a kind of, I'd say, not expected.
Okay, so Josephine, if that baby will be born in the UK next year, will your organization try to prevent that birth and others going forward?
Well, it's not my organization. I think one needs to look worldwide at the sense of anxiety that there's been in the press over this story, because there's so little known about how it was actually achieved. But I do want to reflect yet again, because it's something I'm very concerned about, is the process of harvesting women's eggs. I think you do need to know a lot more about what's gone on in that field. This can't go ahead the way it was done in the Mexican experience without using human eggs. You can't get human eggs easily. And I do know young women. I know a young 19-year-old who sold her eggs because she wanted to get her...
You do expect the United Kingdom to
you
follow
can't.
the highest ethical standards, right?
Well, one would like to think so, but I think if you're trying to pass legislation for something that's unethical in itself, no amount of legislation can make it ethical. And I also say it's not providing a cure for mitochondrial disease. It's trying to create an embryo and then the fetus developing without the disease, but it's not going to cure the mitochondrial disease in those who are born randomly. So,
but
you know, it is an issue of...
That's what I'm failing to understand. Is this not the best alternative to a cure that would have to come later on when somebody is already suffering? This stops the suffering before it even starts.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the person who's suffering, that's the very person I'm concerned about. That's the person we should be helping. Yeah. Doing this three-parent embryo approach, using genetic material from two mothers, we don't know in the long term. Another issue here, what will happen when these children created in this way grow up and they come to want to reproduce? What are the longer term significance of these so-called breakthroughs?
But scientists always do have to enter the unknown. Scientists have to enter the unknown territories in many respects. And in the case of IVF, it's been proven, in spite of the critics, that these were born healthy children and they remain healthy adults decades later. Do you not think that could be the same for the three-parent babies?
Well, I think if you look at IVF, you are looking at an attempt to mimic nature. There was never any sense of using two mothers or two fathers. It was always sperm and egg and creation. It was, as I say, it was mimicking nature. This is not mimicking nature. We don't have maternal input from we don't have two lots of maternal input in the natural course of events. So I think this is what we have to be concerned about. And you also do have to look at the background to this particular story. As I say, 5 human embryos were created. We believe that life begins at the moment of conception when the embryo is created, and that is a fact too. Okay. That's how Louise Brown and everybody else came into the world. So what about the 4 who didn't make it? Evidently 1 died and 3 others were seriously abnormal. You are experimenting on this child, and let's see what happens. I mean, I sincerely hope it's happily ever after, but things could go very wrong.
Okay, yeah. Let me get Dusko's response, because Josephine, you obviously see an embryo as equivalent to a human child. But Dusko, go ahead.
Well, I don't see embryo equal to human child. It's no consciousness. It's just clump of the cells. It's the beginning of life. And if we have this concern, there would be no pre-implantation genetic diagnostic. There will be no number of the children and families who were able to get children in the next generation free of diseases like Huntington disease or cystic fibrosis, spinal muscular atrophy, all those genes that we know, diseases that we know that are transferred by one gene. So yes, you create in IVF, you process a number of the embryos. Some of them have mutations, some of them not. And those that are unhealthy, you don't transfer to women. You don't bring to life. You stop there.
Dusko, if this path of research is prevented because of the ethical debate around it, how much do you think will be compromised in the way of what other cures or treatments could be discovered?
But so, I mean, the whole point with mitochondrial disease is it's once when child is born, there is no cure, there is no treatment. We have no way to help them. There is no possibility. So the only way that you do intervention is at that stage. And so what actually bringing genes from the third person, that is only, in mitochondria we have only about 30 genes, and they're all of them encoding enzymes for energy production. So there is nothing else, just energy production enzymes. All other traits and characteristics are from parents that's sitting in nucleus. So they're still from 2 parents.
Let me get final words from Josephine.
Well, I mean, I do go back to this concept that human life begins at conception. The value that you attribute to it may differ amongst different people, but it's an indisputable biological fact that that's when human life begins, and that's when human life is worthy of respect. My last word would be find a cure for mitochondria disease which doesn't involve this manipulation, this genetic manipulation of the human embryo.
Okay, Josephine Quintavalle and Dusko Ilic, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you both so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, should the international community put politics aside to help North Korean flood victims? And in Picture This, protests over university tuition fees in South Africa turn violent. The International Federation of the Red Cross says hundreds of thousands of people in North Korea are in desperate need of humanitarian aid following devastating floods in recent weeks. But the response of the international community has been muted, to say the least. Is aid to North Korea being unfairly politicized? We'll be discussing that in a moment with a Red Cross representative in Pyongyang. But first, this report from Christine Perovolakis.
It was a rare admission of weakness, coming from one of the world's most oppressive regimes. Last month, North Korea's official news agency reported that floods had devastated northern parts of the country. Triggered by torrential rain, the floods killed at least 140 people and left another 70,000 homeless, according to estimates from the International Federation of the Red Cross. And now that same aid organization says the country desperately needs humanitarian aid, as 600,000 people affected by the floods are at risk of hunger and disease.
The non-food items and the shelter items that the Red Cross have been able to distribute, the DPRK Red Cross, the affected community have now taken those items and have been able to build temporary shelters in their locations or close to their locations until they can get a permanent solution.
The UN has appealed for $28 million to help North Korea's flood victims, while the Red Cross says it requires $15 million to help the region recover. But it's only managed to raise 11% of that. And that's because the issue of aid in North Korea is highly political. Potential donors are reluctant to offer any support to a regime which is reported to be spending at least $1 billion on developing nuclear weapons, in defiance of UN resolutions. Last month, Pyongyang conducted its 5th nuclear test, triggering more international sanctions. The United States says it has no plans to send humanitarian aid. And South Korea has also ruled out sending help to its aggressive northern neighbor. The Red Cross is asking for countries to put politics aside and help those in need. But not everyone is listening. Critics say North Korea's appeal for humanitarian aid is deceptive. There are concerns that if aid is given, how much of it will reach the people in the hardest hit regions? Or will it be used to reinforce the Pyongyang regime and its nuclear aspirations? Christine Perovolakis, The Newsmakers.
And Chris Staines joins me now from Pyongyang. He's the head of the delegation at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I want to get a clearer picture from you of actually what you're seeing on the ground there and what North Koreans themselves that have suffered now are actually up against, especially compared to other developing and isolated countries that you've worked in.
Well, the situation in North Hamgyong province is quite difficult for the people that are living there. And for those that have been affected by the floods, it's quite desperate. They have their houses have been washed away, all of their belongings, their possessions are gone. The most basic of things like cooking items and bedding and clothing is all lost. And the people that are affected are just trying to get on with their lives and do what they can. The area is quite isolated and remote. It's in the northeastern area of the country, with the border with China, formed by the Tumen River, which is the river that flooded and caused so much of the loss. So access to the area is a challenge, there's no doubt about that.
Okay, and when you hear that donors are reluctant to give to North Korea, because they fear where this money will go and that it will fall into the hands of North Korean authorities. How do you respond to them?
Well, this is a humanitarian situation. The needs of the people that are affected are the same needs that people all around the world face. The need for safe shelter, for safe water, for medicines, for food. These people have been affected by a terrible flood disaster, a disaster which has left them with nothing and left them very vulnerable as we approach a very cold winter. In this part of the country, the temperatures plunged to below zero. Last year, the 23rd of October was the day that the first snows fell. That's just a little over 2 weeks away from now, and there are thousands of people who are exposed and don't have the safety of a warm bed to sleep in.
Okay, but Chris, do you accept the argument that when aid has to be funneled through the government in power, and that by giving that aid to this government first, you're actually empowering the people that keep them poor, and they are able to actually profit themselves from this aid rather than giving it to the people in need, so that it's actually counterproductive to give to a country like North Korea?
DPRK is a complex situation. There are many complex situations in the world at the moment. There are many difficult humanitarian issues that we all face. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's about how we respond to the needs of the people that are affected. All of the organisations working here have experience working in difficult environments. We all understand the need for working directly with communities, monitoring the way in which the support is provided. For the Red Cross and Red Crescent, it's simple. We work through our local partners. The DPRK Red Cross were on the ground in the very first minutes after this disaster. They've been constantly on the ground since, and they'll be here long after the international organisations are no longer working with the affected people. They are part of the community. They see where the work goes. They know how to channel the aid so that it reaches those most in need.
So
and that's how we work.
You are getting help from the North Korean authorities?
DPRK has been very cooperative and supportive. I was part of the initial joint assessment mission which visited the affected areas in the first week of September. We had the opportunity to work with the government officials. They were very open, gave us access to all of the information that we needed, allowed us to work with and meet the local authorities, work with people in the communities, to visit the various sites. It was very flexible. We've enjoyed good cooperation and good coordination with the authorities since. And as is the case in most of these disasters, it is the authorities, the government, that leads the response.
Right.
The international community is contributing, but it's the government that is leading, and it's the people themselves that are doing most of the work.
But Chris, some investigations have shown that North Korea is happy to take international aid in lieu of actually paying for the imports that they would otherwise have to fund themselves, and then they use the money that they've saved to spend on weapons programs, for example.
As I said, DPRK is a complex situation. I'm a simple aid worker. I try not to become too involved in politics. As a member of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, I'm guided by our fundamental principles. The first one of those is about humanity, responding to the needs of people in crisis. Guided by that, I don't need to be too concerned about some of these other issues. We know what we do. We know how to go about it. We make sure that we work with the local authorities and with the local Red Cross to reach the local communities, to reach the people in need, to deliver support where it's actually needed. We've seen the need. We know it's there. We know that support is needed, and we're calling on the international community to give that support, to reach out and be humanitarian in our efforts.
And Chris, the ICRC and other NGOs are often the only ones that can actually provide a lens into what's actually happening on the ground in North Korea. How important is that? How important is your work to get the world to see what's happening in this very isolated country?
Well, we think our work's important, but of course our work is for the people themselves, and it's for the people we work with. The people in DPRK are the same as people all around the world. They're interested in their families, they're interested in education for their children, they're interested in safety and security and building a better life. It's the same as people anywhere else in the world, and it's great to have the opportunity to work with them. We have a dedicated and very committed group of people working in international organisations and in the international community present here in DPRK, and all of us are working because we believe in the common humanity we share, in the needs of individuals and people of DPRK.
Okay, Chris Staines, unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from Pyongyang. In today's Picture This, there have been battles between police and students at a university campus in Johannesburg where students were protesting the government's latest plan to raise tuition fees. Let's take a look.
You do not understand our pain. You do not understand our parents' pain. Please, you must give us free education. That's what we want in South Africa. That is what they promised us as the ANC in 1994.
We were outside singing, and yeah, we were brutalized. And I think all of us have a right to protest.
You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.